The big thing that I discovered is if you tackle value add projects, fix and flips, renovation projects, etc., there's a lot of leverage out there. For example, there's a home that's worth $100,000. You put 20% down, that's $20,000. Let's take the same home that will be worth $100,000 after you fix it up. Because it's a hole or because it's abandoned or whatever, maybe now you only have to pay $50,000 to get in the door, and maybe it needs $10,000 to $20,000 worth of renovation. Now your purchase price is half. There's lenders across the industry that will lend you 90% of the purchase price. So before, you had to come out $20K out of pocket. Now you're only coming out $5K. And now you're actually doing value add. You're all in for 70, 50 purchase price, 20 renovation. You borrowed 65 out of that 70, and now you're gonna do a cash out refinance, pay off the original investor, get your original 5K back, and now you're all in on this 100K home, and you're zero money out of pocket instead of 20K. In a nutshell, that's how I was able to scale so fast.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Learn Like a CPA show. I'm your host, Ryan Bakey. Today, I got a guest, Harrison Goldblatt from San Diego. We met at the STR Nation conference, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Padres game was pretty cool, wasn't it?
Absolutely. We got a really cool setup. We were on that rooftop overlooking the game, all you can eat. And there wasn't even like a set seating arrangement, so you could float around a little bit and also sit if you wanted to. So that was a great experience.
All you can eat, except they didn't tell you when it ended. I was so mad. I didn't get any food at my own event.
all you can eat until the fifth inning or something.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your educational background. It's normally a good question I always like to ask people.
Yeah, absolutely. So you might notice right away, I pointed in the wrong direction. You might notice right away, I have a degree behind me on the wall. It's economics and accounting from UC Santa Barbara. I actually did go down the path for the first few years of college thinking I was going to go the CPA route. So I ended up taking quite a few accounting electives. Ultimately ended up doing something else. But yeah, I have a 4-year degree from UC Santa Barbara for economics and accounting.
Wow. You're actually the second person I talked to today that has an accounting degree. I normally don't talk to a lot of accountants. It's funny. So one of the mistakes that a lot of real estate investors make is they self-prepare their tax returns. So they have 3 or 4 rental properties and they think that they can do their tax returns themselves. Oh, it's just, put the income on there. What did I spend? Blah, blah, blah. And it's funny because I probably reviewed over 500 returns that were self-prepared, like by somebody that wasn't an accountant. And there was only one guy that ever did it right.
Wow.
One guy.
So what's the percentage on that? Like 0.02 or something?
0.25%. But the guy that did it right had an accounting degree.
Got it.
So
yeah,
kind of figures, right? So I really enjoy economics, actually, understanding kind of like people's motives and incentives to want to do something or not do something, kind of the whole, supply, demand, or like price and elasticity and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. If you have 10 bananas and 1 apple, you might be willing to give up 2 or 3 bananas for 1 extra apple. Right? Like if you have a surplus of one thing and a limited amount of another, then you can trade what you have more of for what you have less of.
Have you ever seen that video? It was like, it was these guys that were selling eggs. Like 2 guys were selling eggs and they were both selling for like $50. And the one guy's like, oh, I'm gonna sell them for $40. And then the other guy like lowered his price down to 40 or 35. And then the one guy lowered his price all the way down to 20. And then the guy who had his price at 30 bought all the guy's eggs at 20 and then put the price back up.
Yeah, brilliant.
What was your first like forte into real estate? What was your first property?
So from the jump, I was very motivated to get into real estate. I took extra steps to do it. So I made sure my first job out of college was close enough to my parents' home so that I could commute for about a year. And that allowed me to save up to buy my first townhome in Los Angeles, which was a house hack, 3 bedrooms, rented out the extra bedrooms. So I basically, as soon as I graduated college, I decided that I was trying to find any way possible to not pay rent and go into that rabbit hole.
Especially in California.
especially in California. My office at the time was in Santa Monica, so I ended up paying $1,500 a month, I think 3 years later, to live near my office and rent. And that was half of the base pay that I was getting each month. So I was really grateful that I had made that sacrifice in the beginning to stay at home until I could afford my first investment, which was a townhome.
So what were the numbers on this first property? Because I started off with a house hack. I remember my mortgage payment was $1,600 bucks. $1,600. I lived in the bottom. I rented out the top. I was getting $1,200 a month in rent for the top. So I was only spending $400 a month to live, essentially, when most of my friends and everybody else was spending $1,500, $1,600 a month just to rent. What were the numbers on your first one? Do you remember?
Yes, I do approximately. So the purchase price was $345, and I think it was worth about $370 when I got it, maybe $380. And I got a good deal. It was listed very poorly, and the seller was motivated. And this was after maybe 3 to 6 months of searching. I lived in the master bedroom, and then there were 2 secondary bedrooms. I charged $800 for one and $700 for the other. So my rental revenue was $1,500, and then the obligations on the place were about $2,000 to $2,200. The mortgage was about $1,200. It was a 4% rate. The HOA was $450, and then taxes came out to about $350 a month. So I want to say it was, between $2,000 to $2,200 a month to pay for the place, and I was collecting $1,500. So my monthly payment was around $700, between $700 to $1,000.
And was it FHA conventional loan? Do you remember?
It was a conventional loan.
Good.
Yeah.
What was the biggest lesson from that first property?
Well, I actually ended up self-managing that property all the way up until I sold it in May of this year, 2024. And there were countless experiences finding tenants, having tenants live with each other that didn't know each other. I've decided I don't want to be in the game of renting out places to parties that don't know each other within the same property. I think one of the first big things I tackled when I bought that place was painting. When I bought it, the reason I got such a good price on it was because it was painted all sorts of nasty colors, like dark purple, bright pink, orange. The dining room was yellow. The kitchen was red. It was unbelievable. So my first 2 months of living there, I would come home from work and I would just paint. Now, I haven't really painted a whole lot since, but that and having other hands-on duties like changing doorknobs, changing light bulbs, all the basic home repairs, I got a firsthand experience of what it meant to just fix basic things around the house and also self-manage a property. So if a property manager is ripping me off, as long as they're transparent, I can figure it out relatively quickly.
So you felt like the property managers can rip you off at sometimes?
Absolutely. Well, in this case, I was self-managing. So I understand if there's a small thing that needs to be repaired, you can just take care of it yourself.
Yeah.
So for example, I had a tenant call me and he's like, the doorknob is broken. And I'm like, it's not broken. He's like, well, it's loose and I can't open and close the door. I said, okay, just go downstairs, grab a screwdriver, tighten it. He's like, but I don't know how to do it. And I said, trust me, you'll be able to figure it out. And then within 30 minutes, he calls and says, okay, problem was fixed.
Mm-hmm. Where are you currently at with your portfolio now?
So now I have about 60 units, and they're primarily in Cleveland, Ohio.
So that was that the only property you bought in California?
That's the only property I bought in California. That's correct.
So there had to be some kind of like mindset shift or change to go buy a property that's, what is it, like 1,300 miles away? How far is it away?
Absolutely. Probably closer to 2,000 miles.
2,000? Okay.
Yeah. So we skipped over about 8 years. So I bought that first property in 2017. And in 2024, I'm aggressively growing a portfolio in Cleveland, Ohio. In between that time, I moved to Las Vegas and bought a couple of properties. And I house hacked again. And then the third one was meant to be a primary that I was going to stay at for a while. And so while I was living in Las Vegas, I was already having the experience of self-managing a property out of state. And maybe once every 6 months, I'd have to drive into California, re-lease the place, do some touch-up work. And at the time, my whole family lives in Los Angeles. So even though I was managing out of state, if I did have to come back to Los Angeles to take care of something, I could stay with my parents and see my family. So it was very much killing two birds with one stone. But that was my first experience self-managing out of state. And that's maybe 250 miles apart.
Mm. So you realized if you could do it 250 miles apart, you could do it 1,700 miles apart.
Yes. That was a step in that direction for sure.
And so what drew you to Ohio?
Well, frankly, I did sign up for a service called Section 8 Secrets with Tom Cruise, and he flashes the Rolls-Royce Phantoms and the $1 million yachts. And at the time, I had a couple of properties that were worth $300,000 in Las Vegas and $600,000 in LA. And these places were either barely cash flowing or cash flowing $400 to $500 a month max. And I started seeing ads by this guy saying he was cash flowing $500 a month off of properties worth $60,000. And I was thinking, if my goal is cash flow, which it was because I wanted to find a way to work for myself, if my goal was cash flow, then I need to be buying these homes where the cash flow is 10 times better than what I was doing in Los Angeles and Las Vegas, right? It was just like a simple, okay, if I have a place in LA worth about 600,000, cash flowing peanuts, or I could have 10 places in Cleveland, Ohio, cash flowing 5,000 a month. And it was just like that straight line understanding is what made me pull the trigger to start buying in other more affordable markets.
If the cash flow was the same though on one property compared to 5 or 6, you would just have the one property? Because that's something I think about a lot, is like the diversity of properties. Like if I had $1 million of equity, I would rather have that spread across like 3 or 4 properties rather than one property. But
yeah, that's a good question. So I think, I guess there's two things to think about. So the one is how easy it is to manage, right? If you have one tenant paying you $15,000 a month, you don't really have that much to worry about and that many moving parts to communicate with. But the downside is if that one tenant moves out, now you're completely out of your income. Whereas if you have that spread across 10 properties, then if one tenant moves out, you're not suffering so much overnight.
Or even if 2 or 3 of them like move out, you're still 7 for 10. I mean, that's like double the MLB Baseball Hall of Fame. So
yeah, absolutely. Right. So I think, there has to be some happy middle. These days, I'm focusing more on triplexes and fourplexes. It's a similar concept, right? Everything is in one place. If I need to send my maintenance crew out, they could handle 4 units at the same time, 4 tenants at the same time. A lot of these places are under one roof. If you update the windows in the building, you're updating all the windows for all 4 units, et cetera, et cetera. So I am moving more towards buying or getting into properties that are probably worth $250K to $300K, and they're triplexes and fourplexes instead of the single family $75K home.
So you go from 1 unit to 60 units. Like, what are some of the big lessons along the way there? Because that's pretty big feat to do.
Yeah, thank you. So I was very much going for speed. And I started to pick up a few at a time, get my feet wet, work with a couple different contractors and management companies. And then I started pulling off packages. And the first question everyone will think is, well, how did you possibly get all the money to pull this off? And the secret, if you will, and what I'm doing and what I'm about is lowering the barrier to entry for people that want to do the Burr method and invest in real estate in general. And what I discovered, the big thing that I discovered is if you tackle value add projects, fix and flips, renovation projects, et cetera, these are all the different words for the same thing. there's a lot of leverage out there. So for example, let's use simple numbers. Let's say there's a home that's worth $100,000, and on standard move, you get a DSCR loan, debt service coverage ratio. You put 20% down. That's $20,000. Okay, out of pocket day one, just in down payment. Let's take the same home that will be worth $100,000 after you fix it up, because it's a hole, or because it's abandoned or whatever. Maybe now you only have to pay $50,000 to get in the door, and maybe it needs $10,000 to $20,000 worth of renovation. So now your purchase price is half. There's lenders across the industry that will lend you 90% of the purchase price. So they'll give you 45 out of that 50, and then they'll issue the renovation budget on draws. So before, you had to come out $20K out of pocket just to get into this turnkey rental. Now you're only coming out $5K out of pocket. Of course, I'm ignoring tons of expenses. I'm ignoring title costs, et cetera, et cetera. But just for like simplicity, now that reduces your cost to get in the door by, from 20,000 down to 5 to get into the same property. And now you're actually doing value add. So you fix it up, you're all in for 70 if you're using the numbers I used. So 50 purchase price, 20 renovation. You borrowed 65 out of that 70, and now you're going to do a cash out refinance, pay off the original investor, get your original 5K back, maybe more. And now you're all in on this 100K home, and it's nice and clean because you just fixed it up, and you're zero money out of pocket instead of 20K. And in a nutshell, that's how I was able to scale so fast. And that's the industry standard equivalent of what someone else can do if they either find the right lenders or have some sort of track record.
So the key is to figuring out, because you made a good point that at the end of the day, the property is going to be worth the same amount of money because you're going to do the renovation. It's just what cash outlay do you have out of your own pocket to get that done? Like, do you put the 20% down regular DSCR or investment loan and then also come out of pocket for the rehab? Or, do you get in there as little money down as possible, have somebody else fund most of that, and then get your money back out? Has there ever been a time, I guess, where you weren't able to get your money out right away?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So just at a high level, I've invested about $250K into the business. And that's from savings, from technology sales commissions, from second mortgages on my original properties. But I've pulled out about $320,000 in cash out refinances. So every dollar I put in, I've been able to pull back out through a cash out refinance. So there's definitely losers within that situation. So I did get into a duplex in Detroit, which was a renovation project. I ultimately bought in the wrong area on the wrong block. Comps were dropping while I was in the deal. I think me and a partner bought in with $50,000, and I think we walked away with $15,000. So it was just,
wow.
Yeah, it was a year-long painful $35,000 loss. So that's a loss where the whole transaction took place already. There's also a duplex that I picked up in a package of 22 units. And this particular duplex just needs a lot of work, and the value's not there to put the work in. So I'm kind of stuck with it for a while. I'm just going to chip away at that renovation over time and hop from bridge to bridge. So basically 2 units out of the 60 are going to be a thorn in my side for a while.
So a lot of people learn from their own mistakes, but sometimes it's better to learn from other people's mistakes, like yours. What were some of the things on the Michigan or the Detroit project that, looking back now, that was a bad deal, or the reason why it was bad?
So ultimately, these days, I trust my own comps more so than anyone else's. And even then, it's the only thing that really matters is what an appraiser says property's worth. And then on top of that, appraisers amongst each other will have different opinions. So this particular neighborhood, I just did not know well enough. And it was a classic story of me being inexperienced, trusting the brokerage that was trying to sell me the property, believing they wanted a long-term successful relationship. I also took so I had an additional partner on this deal whose girlfriend's family was from the next neighborhood over, and he felt like it was a good area that was going to turn around. And I just took other people's visions and recommendations on this purchase. And ultimately, over time, the comps just got worse. So something I've learned since then is it's not just the home itself that you're evaluating. You really have to evaluate the block that it's on, because if the home you're evaluating has great numbers, like great purchase price, the renovation budget makes sense, et cetera, even the comps like nearby, you really have to see like, okay, what does the house right next door look like? What do the houses on the block look like? If there's 20 houses on the block, how many of them are abandoned? How many of them look like there could be squatters or meth addicts or whatever? And this block was absolutely dilapidated. Just not the house I was getting to. The numbers on the house at the time were fine, but the whole block is something that like you don't even want to set foot on.
So I was going to ask, you have some early mentors. Was one of them the guy that taught you how to do you're doing mostly Burr method, right?
Yes.
Did you have any other early mentors?
Yeah. So I kind of want to speak generally on the concept of mentors. My dad, for sure, when I was growing up, he was a bartender and a waiter. And I always knew that our family made the bulk of our money from taking tips and any extra income and investing it in the stock market over time. So I know that's not directly related to real estate, but I understood from an early age the concept of having your money work for you. And I put some serious effort into trying to master the stock market myself. I spent during COVID like a year and a half attempting to trade full time. And when I studied accounting, my thought process was I want to understand financial statements so I could invest in the right stocks. Ultimately, I learned that when it comes to stock investing, you have to be a visionary at all times. You have to think, okay, where is this company going to be 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now? And you have to be thinking past all the analysts if you want to really hit a home run. So I had the investing mindset from my dad as a mentor for sure. And then also early on, right out of college, I met this guy named Bart Kogan. He passed away a couple years ago. He was a big donor for Georgetown University. He was involved in the Jewish community. He had 4,000 units, and
wow.
He was, yeah. So I think he passed away in his early 70s. He had 4,000 units, and he just spent his time networking, having a good time, meeting people of all ages. He loved talking about real estate. At the time when I met him, I already had my first home and I was house hacking, which he found to be very interesting. And so we would go out to lunch maybe every 3 months. And I knew, just having someone in your life like that with that many units that you can call anytime and talk about different ideas was very valuable to me. And it was actually him passing away a few years ago where I was like, I really need to make some moves in real estate, because the people that are in their 60s and 70s that are very far ahead in this field, like I don't know how long they'll be around, and I need to talk to these types of people while they are in my life. I don't know if that really makes a whole lot of sense, because that was
it does, yeah.
But yeah, it was like, I had access to such a great mentor in something that I'm heavily pursuing now. So it kind of lit the fire of urgency. Like, like Bart did it, and I can't even consult him anymore. So I got to go figure it out myself now, and I better do it as soon as possible.
And yeah, that's one of the things too, is once they're gone, it's like, unless they wrote a book or they got it out of their head somehow, you're not going to be able to learn that type of stuff anymore, at least not from them. Yeah,
it was a massive missed opportunity. Also, my grandfather, he was a business owner doing something very unrelated. It was a trucking business, but I had spoken to him a few times, and he would often say, "Man, I just wish I bought more real estate."
Yeah, the only guy that I know that has a private jet, he said you make your money in business, you keep it with real estate. And I'll never forget that, because I'm always kind of torn between, because if you have a business, whether it's in a real estate field or not, it's still like an active business, whether
Right.
you're like a realtor, property manager, CPA. It's like, how do you know, the question I had for him is like, how do you know when to leave profits in the business and like keep fueling it, or when to take some out to go and deploy into real estate?
Mhm.
And I don't know if he really answered the question, but he kind of indirectly answered it by saying, you make your money in business and you keep it in real estate.
Mhm.
So I've kind of changed my thinking now to try to, because knowing long term, like you want to park your money in real estate because it's the best tool to like preserve your wealth over time. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of like it's pretty hard to run a business in general. And
Yeah.
real estate, everyone touches real estate. Everyone lives in a place. There's property managers all across the country. There's contractors, plumbers, electricians all across the country because there has to be. And it's almost like if you're starting a business in general, you're kind of paving your own path. But at least
Mhm.
with real estate, there's lenders that would love to lend to you. There's contractors that would love to do work for you. There's there's tenants that want to live in your properties. So the interests and incentives are very much aligned. Now there's people that will rip you off across the board, like tenants. Every single person can find a way to rip you off, but they're
Mhm.
incentivized to help you make it work. Whereas in a lot of other businesses, like I don't know, I was selling software before and it wasn't my own business, but I was working for Oracle and I was worried about competing with Workday and SAP and Amazon. I was working at RSA Security selling cybersecurity software, and I was worried about competing with CrowdStrike and Palo Alto. And every deal cycle I was into, it was competitive. I had to figure out how to be better than the next person. And in real estate, I don't feel that at all. I feel like there's just so much opportunity and there's so many ways to make money, and the demand is so high. I think people are more likely to find ways to help me to have a long-term relationship and repeat business rather than find ways to poke
Mhm.
holes in my product or sales pitch or whatever, et cetera.
I see. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's definitely a helping community, the right people anyway. But yeah, to your point, I mean, there are some scammers and bad apples and that type of stuff out there. So you do a lot of the Burr method. So that's like a tax strategy in itself, because you're pretty much you're refinancing your money out, which is a tax deferred event. What are there some other tax strategies that you like to use?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and I know I'm talking to the right person, and I will be humbled by my answers. I I went to H&R Block this past year.
Uh-oh.
I wanted to save money, and I
Stop
was
the bleeding.
yeah, I know I showed it to a CPA a few months later, and they're like, everything you did is completely wrong.
Mm.
And I really, I had already had 50 plus properties. So I needed someone to do the tax prep and I needed to save money. So I definitely took a shortcut and I will be paying for it this year by hiring professional help. Um, and, but in general, my understanding of taxes and tax benefits, I did study accounting, right? So you touched on something huge, which is the cash out refinances. So if I do a tremendous amount of value add, I'll reference one property in particular. I had a loan on it for 130,000. I put 60,000 in renovations in that home, and then it was appraised at 390. And this was a surprise appraisal. I thought it was going to appraise between 300 and 350. So when I do the cash out refinance, I can pull out 75 cents of every dollar that it appraises for. So I'm walking away with a new loan of maybe 290,000. I end up with over 100K cash in my account from the cash out refinance. And that's cash that I could use for whatever, run my business, live my life. And that's not taxed, right? Because it's just a bigger loan. It's not income,
Hmm.
a larger loan on something I already own. And that by itself is a huge benefit that I think a lot of people, it just flies over most people's heads. Like I have cash in my account that's going to be paid off by tenants over 30 years, but I could use it today for whatever I want, and it's all tax-free. So that's huge, right? And that's what you were touching on, I think. And then the other aspect that I'm aware of is just depreciation. So let's say my properties combined are worth maybe 5 million, approximately 5, maybe 5 to 6. Take out the land value, the remaining amount, just if you do straight line standard depreciation, divide that remaining 4 million or whatever by 27 and a half, that's a tax write-off for every year over the next 27 and a half years.
Yeah, I was just doing the math. It's like 185 grand a year.
Yeah, exactly. So I could have 185K in profit a year, and it's all washed out by just depreciation on the existing portfolio. And that's the most conservative approach. You could get way more aggressive with cost segregation or accelerated depreciation. So those are the two things that I'm aware of that I use to my advantage. Well, ineffectively, because I'm not hiring the right people, but
we could take a look at it for you, man. I'll look at it for you if you want to send it to me.
Yeah, sure.
I'll help you out. So have you sold any of them in Ohio? Like when you sell your properties, what type of, because you know, the tax-free refinance is great, but the tax bill happens whenever you sell the property. So on the properties that you've sold, or if you have sold some, I don't know, but are you 1031ing them? Are you selling them and buying something else? Like how are you offsetting the taxes on the gains?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I have done a 1031 exchange before. When I sold that first property in Los Angeles, I did a partial 1031, sold that one unit, bought 8 units in Cleveland, Ohio. So that will eliminate some of those taxes there. When I am selling a property, I am aware that if I hold to the property for over a year, it's then a long-term capital gain instead of a short-term capital gain. Mm-hmm. I have not really focused on that too much because it's kind of like if I want the cash, I'm just going to sell what makes sense and then worry about the taxes later. So I've done a 1031. I may do them more in the future, but at this point, if I'm selling a property, it's because I will find the cash to be useful.
So that's another thing too. So hopefully people understand this, but it's super technical. The problem that happens a lot, especially with people that like borrow the appreciated value, like keep borrowing, is sometimes I've seen it where when they go to finally sell the property, the equity that they have when they walk away is actually less than the amount of taxes that they owe. So, for example, like let's say you bought let's say you bought $100,000 property in California. I'm just using easy math, and then the thing goes up to 300 grand. So then you pull out 210 out of it, right? So your capital gain is the difference between the 300 minus the original $100,000 purchase price multiplied by the tax rate. But when it comes to equity at the closing table, you're only going to get the 300 grand minus the 210. I've seen it happen on even bigger scales where you have a $100,000 property that turns into $1 million property. So the taxes on that, you're looking at $300,000 in taxes on $1 million gain. But what happened is they took out a loan for $800K. So they get 200 grand when they close, but their tax bill is also 200 grand. And so that's the problem, or we call it a wherewithal to pay problem. That could be the problem when you just keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing against the appreciated value of the property. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's good on a 50, 60 unit portfolio to have some of them that are completely paid off and to have some of them that are 80% LTV, 70% LTV to kind of like balance each other out. Because one thing that I learned from someone is there's like this, we call it like a no man's land between 35% to 60% ownership in a property where the bank doesn't really have the upper hand and you don't have the upper hand. And so like that 35, like I never want to have 35 to 60% ownership of a property. I'd rather either have 20% or I'd rather have 30% or less ownership, or I'd rather have more than 60. But I don't want to be in that we just call it no man's land.
So that point you were making with the $1 million home, but you took an $800,000 loan, it sounds like you can avoid that problem if you 1031 it.
That's
but
right.
then you still have to pay off that $800,000 loan. So you could still get in a jam that way.
Yeah, and the problem with the 1031 in that scenario is the equity that you have in the property also has to be the equity that you roll over into the new property.
Right.
So if I have if I sell a property for $1 million and I have an $800,000 loan on it, I have 200 grand of equity.
Mm-hmm.
So the property that I have to buy has to be at least $1 million in
Right.
purchase price and that same 200 in equity.
Right.
I've also seen it where somebody owns $1 million house, but they have $800,000 in equity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another problem in itself. Well, if they want to 1031 it, they have to buy a property that A is at least worth $1 million, but B, they have to take that 800K of equity and put it into the new investment. And not a lot of people like to be 80% LTV like that.
But you can easily find a property that's worth 2 million or 3 million to use that equity, to use that 800K, and you could buy something more expensive. There's no penalty.
If their risk tolerance is up for it, yeah.
Yeah.
So some people who go from, some people who get lucky, and this happened all the time in the short-term rental market, like there's people that bought a $400,000 or $500,000 cabin in the Smokies that now is trading for 1.2 million.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to be honest with you, they don't have the skill set to go buy $1 million properties. They bought a second family vacation rental cabin. They put it on Airbnb and they got lucky.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody told me one time, the worst thing that you can do is take a speculative risk on an investment and be right.
Wait,
the market,
that's the worst thing you can do?
That's the worst thing you can do, because you have this false sense of confidence that everything that you touch just turns into gold.
Oh yeah. So, that was me.
And you know this.
I do know this. Absolutely. Yeah. In 2016, from that, there was a Bitcoin run. I basically turned 15K into 70K in like a month and a half. And then I ended up splitting it between one cryptocurrency, which was a full scam, and then a friend's business, which wasn't a full scam, but pretty close. I fortunately got my money back from that one. So I ended up ahead slightly, but it was painful. So yeah, I actually experienced exactly what you're describing.
Yeah, I'll never forget this. Like when you're in high school and you're not like the smart kid, or you're not the one that everybody looks up to for finances, because nobody has money in high school, right?
Yeah.
But then I go to college and get an accounting finance degree, and then I get my CPA license. Well, I have some friends from high school that reach out and say, hey, I'll never forget this. Like I had a friend of mine, he had $30,000 in a checking account, calls me up. This was like April during COVID. I think this was 2021, April. He calls me up. He goes, I'm going to take this 30 grand. It's all that I have, every single dime. And I'm going to start doing swing trading, or like not day trading, but like less than 30-day trades, pretty much like 14, 15-day holds. And I'm like, man, probably not a good idea if that's your entire net worth. Like, if it were me, I would have X% here, X% there, maybe save up some of it for a house. Like I probably wouldn't put it all in one trade. And he calls me back.
You put it all in one trade? It wasn't
all in one investment. One investment. I can't even tell you the name of the investment, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Calls me back 3-4 months later. He goes, man, I just turned $30,000 into $85,000.
Nice.
Doing one trade. And so he was so excited about it. And I tell him, I go, the next 2 words that came out of my mouth, I was talking to him over the phone. I go, dude, you're fucked. He goes, what do you mean? I go, because you took a speculative risk on an asset that you knew nothing about, and the market rewarded you for it. And he didn't listen. Sure enough, guess how much of the 80,000 that he has left?
Oh no.
Nothing.
Oh no.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I don't want to like call him or text him and like, put salt on an open wound, but that's a really big fear of mine, is like not being super educated about something, but doing it anyway, and then getting rewarded for it. So then I think that, okay, this is easy. It'd be like, be like jumping into a boxing ring for the first time with somebody who doesn't know how to fight, and you beat the crap out of them, and then you're like, oh, I can do this. This is easy. Yeah. And then you get in the ring with Tyson, and he rips your freaking head off. That's
like beginner's luck almost.
But that can happen in investing is all that I'm trying to say. That's the point.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we met, I was in an interesting point. It was only like 3-4 months ago. I think we met in June out here in San Diego. And what happened was I found this unique opportunity where I had a lender that was willing to finance purchase prices and renovations of properties. And he would also like have them within his Rolodex of business. Like, okay, this owner is incompetent. They're not making their payments. Harrison, will you just take over the loan? I could assign the property to you, et cetera. And so I did quite a few of those. And I basically was getting into all these hard money loans. And the number one priority was for me to get them into long-term debt, which I was successfully able to do. I have my last duplex that I'm refinancing from that original batch in 2 weeks. And I ended up working with, I didn't really know a lot about construction, but I did hire a guy that was able to get the job done, but he was just finding ways to rip me off more and more over time. And his deal with me was, I will give you the renovations at cost if you let me manage the properties. And I said, okay. And apparently this is a common thing that they do. So he was at least sticking to his budgets, which was fine, because if I know your budget going in, then I know if I'm getting into a good deal or not. And what would happen was the cash flow, once I'd get these places rented, there were always several $1,000s worth of expenses that just didn't make any sense. Like, why are we replacing all these windows every month, all these doors? Like, did I really have a leak at a third of my properties this month and the month before and the month before? And it was just so clear to me that he was making up bills and maintenance and then charging himself. And then as I started questioning more and more and more, all of a sudden the renovations were going over budget and over timeline. So it's like, okay, you're just literally finding one way to screw me or another. So I had stopped working with him. And at the time I met you, I was in a frenzy because it was during the week between when I knew I had to fire him and I hadn't fired him yet. Yeah. So.
I don't know if you were telling me that story or somebody else told me that, but that's very common, especially with out-of-state investors, because they're just preying on people to have like no idea what stuff costs in the local market, or just not being able to drive by and see the property, because he knows that you're not going to be able to drive by and see what the windows look like and that they need to be replaced. I can't remember if it was you telling me that or somebody else, but I remember a story similar to this.
It was at the Padres game then. That was me.
Man, I can't remember. Tell me more about the what's this? You have your community of your own, just like mine, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a community. I go live 3 to 5 hours a week. The community is through Discord, and my goal is to lower the barrier to entry for real estate investing, and specifically the BRRRR method. I'm very hyper focused on this idea that you could get into these properties and be all in with no money out of pocket at the end of the day. And whether you use a lot of leverage to do it, like I have a track record of doing, or if you buy that $100,000 home that needs renovation, put $70K in and get that $70K back with a cash out refinance, you're still all in, zero money out of pocket. And that allows you to continue to scale. So right now we have about 80 members, and there's a variety of people in there, people that are just beginners, people that have 20 units plus already. I think one guy actually has over 100 units in there. We have lenders. We have people in various markets. I share a lot of my connections in there. And it's all for just $20 a month. And the reason why I do that is because there's so much value in community in real estate. And it's really just the price point's really just to scare away the non-serious people or the scammers or whatever. I don't want to have something completely free. But also, my value proposition, I want it to be insane. Like, I want everyone in the world to think I'm way undercharging, and then they tell all of their friends, and then everyone joins. So that's my selfish angle on it. But the other side is a lot of these people are really getting inspired and finding the connections they need and finding the confidence they need to get into these markets and start getting into real estate investing.
What okay, so you do the Discord, then you have weekly calls, or actually probably more than once a week, right? That you do?
Yeah, so I'm live 3 to 5 hours a week, usually weekdays, 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. And I'll do it either 3 days out of the week or 5 days out of the week, depending on my schedule. I'm actually going to work towards doing more live streams over time, but at this time it's just 3 to 5 hours a week. And you get live one-on-one interaction and questions answered. I answered questions straight from the Discord, and I also record some stuff. I call them toolkit episodes. So if I'm covering a very specific topic that day that's essential to the business model, I'll record it so that members can go back later to see and learn the business model.
What's the website to get access to it?
Yeah, I have it written here on a sticky note. I don't know if it'll do us justice, but it's bursec8.com.
Bursec8.com. All right, we got to talk about that from a marketing perspective.
You love it?
No, we got to change it. Too hard to understand.
Okay.
I'll put it up here though, so everybody can see it. And then where can listeners of the show find you otherwise?
I'm active on Instagram. I post reels every day, and my Instagram handle is harrygold__.
Got it. Yeah, I could link it in the show notes too for you.
Excellent. That'd be great.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, Ryan, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Awesome.